Hello, everyone, and once again, welcome to Cut and Splice. This is Matt,
And this is Jason.
And this is Gil.
and this time around, we are going to be discussing Steven Spielberg's 2001 film AI Artificial Intelligence. Um, it's obviously a science fiction film for those of you who are unaware, starring Haley Joel Osment as a robotic child trying to integrate into the world of into a futuristic world um, in which artificial intelligence artificially intelligent beings basically live side by side with humans, at least to the extent that society is putting up with them, and it deals with his adventures and the world around him. I guess that's a fairly concise summary without spoiling anything. But yeah, so anyway, if anybody wants to dive in with impressions and thoughts and opinions and all that jazz, I'll
And
let
it's
you
good.
guys have at it.
It's good to point out that we're debating to do a Spielberg movie, and I'm sure we'll do other ones in the future. But for some reason, I felt like of all his movies, this one is worth a second look more than anything else because it's got some controversy to it, or just more the backstory that it was a Kubrick Spielberg joint production after Kubrick had passed, and almost an homage to him in a way, or at least I think Spielberg pretty much made it his next project because Kubrick passed away. Although I wonder, because he died in like '99, so he might have already been in pre-production pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the infamous ending, which we can get to in the second half. But yeah, what about you, Jason? How was your overall impression, this time around or first time around?
I never disliked the movie when I saw it in theaters. I do think this was probably the second time I'd ever seen it. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I had seen it once when it came out on video or something, DVD. But I think I definitely hadn't seen it in at least 20 years or something like that. Yeah, it's I never disliked the movie. I thought it was pretty good. Um, Certainly has its flaws. This time around, I don't know. It just kind of reinforced how I felt about it. I think Haley Joel Osment is like his performance more or less carries the movie. I think it's there aren't that many great child actors that have been around in the over the years, and I think he had a good 3 or 4 movies that were as a small kid that were pretty successful, and this was a pretty good performance, really eerie and in a lot of ways. But yeah, I don't know, it's definitely not a perfect movie. It's got some issues, but I guess I probably liked it a little bit more this time. But it just it's so far from being like my top 5 of Spielberg's favorite, my favorite Spielberg movies or anything. So I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I was very surprised when I checked my rating from back then because I remember having a serious problem with the ending of the movie, and there's definitely also some pacing issues. That's more of a Kubrick thing. He was going for the whole episodic, um, borderline road movie type of thing. Not really a road movie though. Very episodic um, movie structure, which was definitely an homage to Kubrick, and I'm sure it came out of development as well. And apparently, that ending, um, um, a lot of people thought it was Spielberg who added that on, but he said that it was actually Kubrick's ending. That's the way he wanted to end it.
I read
So
that
it's
too. I
like,
was surprised by that.
yeah, so it's interesting, but So yeah, my rating back then, just to get right into it, I give it a 9. And for a movie that I had a lot of issues with, I was very surprised. But I wonder if that was an emotional rating because it was Kubrick, it was Spielberg, and it was a very thought-provoking concept. I love the piano, but the Pinocchio aspect of this, like a modern day Pinocchio, but maybe taking it one step further, but then taking that too many steps further. Pretty much, that was like the problem of the movie. Um, but yeah, and this time around, the funny thing is, I think I liked the movie better this time, or I appreciated better, especially the ending. I forgave more, but I need to drop the rating because it's definitely not a 9. It would probably fall somewhere in the 7 or so. It's got some really it's really um, thought provoking and very uh, calculated. It's a very interesting concept to take the idea of a child that's basically the most sympathetic of all characters that you can think of, because he's, aside from a pet, like, because he can't really fend for himself, and you make him a robot in a future where robots are essentially the enemy, like they are being um, discriminated against and killed um, left and right. To have him go on this journey, and it's and we will get, I guess, more into the themes and stuff, and where, I guess, where it's like kind of what it's sort of saying about it. But yeah, I thought it was like, wow, this is like really deep stuff. But the pacing, the ending, a lot of things there really uh, it struggled for me.
Geez, okay, so this was 2001, so I was 16-ish when this movie came out, and I remember seeing it in theaters and having a particularly lukewarm response to it. I mean, I, I mean, when it comes to Spielberg, I mean, you know, even as a teenager, I was a massive Spielberg fan, and it's only gotten more and more obsessive as I've gotten older. I still maintain that he's the greatest living filmmaker. Um, so it's odd for me to actually think that there are Spielberg movies out there other than like what 1941 and Always, that I've only seen once, and it just never really popped into my head like, oh, I'm going to see I'm just going to sit down and watch Artificial Intelligence again. I haven't since it was in theaters. Uh, and I'm glad that I did sit down and watch it again at my current age, which I just I suppose our listeners can do the math, but I'm not going to do it for you. Uh, 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 I it is a more mature movie than I think I was ready for uh, back then, and I think if I were to have rated it back then, I probably would have put it at a 5 or a 6. I mean, I really just didn't care for it. This time around, uh, it's hard to avoid the fact that uh, the I mean, Spielberg was really shooting for the moon in terms of building a movie around a child, and fortunately, it was at a time when we did have a talent like Haley Joel Osment at that age to actually come in and play this role so well. Uh, and I mean, I think his reach did. I think that Spielberg's reach did exceed its grasp, but I respect the fact that he did reach so high, that he did try to actually make something like this, and I just think he again reach exceeded his grasp a little bit, this time around. But
So as far as your rating now, where would you put it?
um, think I would probably put it like 7.5.
Jason?
Yeah.
I was trying to think about that earlier. If we're just like thinking about Spielberg's more, more modern science fiction films and stuff that he's made right around the same time as this movie and everything. I think this movie is better than War of the Worlds, but not nearly as good as Minority Report. So I don't know. I'd probably put it like a 7. Because I'd probably put like War of the Worlds at like a 6 or so. I don't even think I could go 6.5. I'd go like a 6. And my Minority Report I'd put quite a bit higher.
That's funny. I gave War of the Worlds a 7. So yeah, I can see myself on a rewatch. It's tough. It's tough to rate a Spielberg movie under a 7 unless it is like I think Always was not great. I would probably give that a 6.
I think War of the Worlds was an okay movie. I just it's a great story and and the original is good and everything. But I think with Tom Cruise and Spielberg and everything and what's her name? I just
Dakota Fanning.
Thank you. Dakota Fanning and I just had really high expectations for it. It kind of let me down.
Yeah, I give Always a 5, which is probably my lowest Spielberg rating. But yeah, War of the Worlds. I remember I don't think I've rewatched it, but I just remember, like maybe I just saw clips from it, like after seeing it, and there's some sequences in there. It reminds me of like E.T. Like you see some sequences there where the movement of the camera and the action is so smooth. It's so frustratingly like so smooth. It's just like it's so enjoyable to watch it. It
It's
just
got
makes
great
it
moments.
so compelling, even though the overarching premise and everything just really falls flat. It definitely does. It's definitely a 6, but because you're Spielberg, I mean, you gotta inch it just for
I
the
know what you
camera
mean.
work.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. They
It's
also shot part of that on
probably
Fujifilm.
unfair. Oh yeah, there's that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I gave The Color Purple a 6. I mean, that's close. That's still low. I mean, yes, I
Pretty
think
good movie.
it's a pretty good movie, but it's not great. I mean, I don't know. I guess I need to revisit The Color Purple because I
I never
felt
saw the
like
beginning of it.
because something about that movie was just so lifeless, which is the complete opposite of what Spielberg is. So I don't know. I definitely need to. Seems like the critics like that more than I did, so I definitely need to give it a rewatched.
I
But
remember it having some really powerful moments.
yeah. So yes, I guess we should go to spoilers then.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was your reaction, I guess, to AI as far as because I can tell me personally because Matt mentioned how different it is to watch as an adult, but watching it with having young kids now, it's a
Oh.
whole other ball game.
Haha.
Not to mention that me personally, I have this whole you know belief in that free will doesn't exist. So we're essentially all biological robots. So um, to me, David, right? His name's David. If I'm
Yes.
David is basically like my kids. It's just that the insides of him are mechanical, but he's basically going through the same issues that any kid would. Uh, Only he's slightly more resilient, maybe, because he's built tough and he doesn't need to eat. And, there's a few things that makes it easier for him to survive to some degree. But you basically take the mind of a child and put him through this holocaust, pretty much. It's like a robot, a holocaust. It's very impactful in the context of having your own kids, to me personally.
I think if there's anything that changed for me in the way that I was watching it now, 20 years later, it's similar to what you're saying and what Matt said as well. The only thing I would say is that I feel like this time around I was watching it a little bit more from the eyes of the parents, whereas I can guarantee you that the first time I saw this, I was just kind of along for the ride with David, because I a few things like stuck out to me that I know just flew right over my head, or I just went in one ear out the other and just was not relevant to me the first time I saw it. But it's all pretty much stuff with the parents, like there's something about the way Francis O'Connor acts when they first show the couple going to the place where their son is in stasis or whatever, his little coma or something that he's in. It's like, to kind of, it's good visual storytelling. It's like they know their way around. They've been there dozens and dozens of times. They probably have a limited amount of time to be there with the kid. So she shows up. She's almost like speed walking through the facility. She goes to the boy. She sits down before the little hyperbolic chamber, or whatever you want to call that thing. Hyperbaric chamber thing comes down, or whatever, the big glass tube that the boy is in. Like, she's there waiting before it even gets there, and she sets up her little Bluetooth speaker and like starts reading to her son like as fast as possible so she can get every second in, and all these little things like that. And the way that the father acts, I don't even remember the actor's name, but the way he acts around the wife, and he's very desperate to help her, but he's kind of helpless to help her. I don't really think I really paid much attention to any of that stuff the first time through. And certainly the scene where she's putting on perfume and they have a line of dialogue that I know I missed the first time around, where he mentions that he likes the perfume she's using, but he makes some comment about how it's super rare and very hard to come by now because they're in the future, and it's probably some very old fragrance or something. And then when when David wastes all of it, on accident, doesn't realize what he's doing. I'm sure the first time around, I just saw that as I mean, I was probably 18 or something like that when this came out, 17, but I still was really zoned in on David. And I was like, kid, you can't do that. You're going to upset the parents. It's kind of the way I was thinking. This time around, I was like, you piece of shit. Oh my God. You know what you just did? That little thing, that little bottle was a freaking aphrodisiac that was keeping this couple together. I mean, they were on rocky times, and that was one of the few things that they had. Oh my God, kid, you just, throw that kid out in the trash right now. He's not even real. He has no feelings. He can't comprehend what he did wrong. Get rid of him. I was like, I'm totally on the parent side now at this point. But
yeah, no, that's true.
Sorry.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
also just lastly, I should say, I can guarantee you that the first time I saw this movie, I was simply looking at it again like a kid, and looking at the two of them as like parents, like a mother and father. And now, as an older man, I'm sitting here watching this thing, and I'm like, who is this Frances O'Connor person? She is hot. And I was like looking at it up, and I was like, oh, Bedazzled. That's where I've seen her in. Yeah. She's the it girl, the one he's trying to, make the deal with the devil for and everything. And yeah.
See, the just a note about what you said about the perspective of the parents.
Milf.
That's
Milf.
the
Milf. No, sorry, go ahead.
that's the one thing. Yeah, it's funny. Like her IMDb photo, she looks really great. But in any case, but yeah, definitely this time around, now having kids, and you guys don't know this, but if you have like kids of friends and what, you kind of get a little bit of this. Kids can be complete assholes, like horrible individuals, but when you love them like a parent, when you get imprinted basically like it is in this movie, or at least he gets imprinted on her, she doesn't get imprinted on him necessarily that quickly. It's not like a flip of a switch for a human, unless it's a biological kid and you've had him since birth. So to me, yes, seeing these scenes where he is just a horrible, horrible kid, like it's just like too much to handle, almost like having a rescue puppy with like a lot of psychological
Yeah.
problems that you just like cannot even like explain to him how to behave. uh, like it would be so tough. Like it's understandable that it was very tough for her to connect with him, which is partially why there's some issues for me, like with the picture perfect ending that was made in the end, because that makes also no sense at all. But then again, maybe it does. So the whole thing is, it's definitely washed over me in a different way. But definitely the fact that he's like not their biological kid, he would be out the door so much more quickly. But I guess that's what they did. She ended up doing that.
Yep.
And I mean, she just pitied him, so she let him loose, so he doesn't get dismantled by the corporation. But yeah, no, it's that whole like first segment was very curious to me, for sure. Like I saw it from like a whole other perspective.
I can definitely see, the perspective of, the kid would have been out of there like lickety split. You're a pain in the ass, and you're not actually my flesh and blood, and you're not even flesh and blood. It's, I mean, in a lot of ways, maybe it would be more adjacent to like adoptive parents if they adopt a kid who's like just kind of rambunctious and not really uh, not really all that interested in discipline or anything like that. Can we
But
take
he's
him
so
back
well
to the
behaved
store?
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean,
That is a good comparison, because usually adoptive kids are the more trouble kids, and there is usually a commitment that somebody takes on. It's a huge commitment to adopt someone, so it's its own sort of like imprint. But in this specific case, just the fact that he's a robot, and then the fact that their kid comes back to life. There's all these things that just don't make that metaphor complete with like a human situation. But maybe to some degree, maybe there was like he was there for a period of time and they felt a connection and they wanted to give it a go, and they tried enough times before they they just stopped trying. But yes, no, there, I have a lot of sympathy for David. Like I feel bad for him. There's a lot of situations there where
Yeah.
it's not his fault. Like the kids are teasing him, and then he grabs the son and pulls him into the pool. Like all these things. Like you definitely feel bad for him. But you also feel bad for the parents. Like it was just a whole ill-advised experiment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it is funny because I think at the beginning of the movie, like at the very very beginning, they were talking about whether or not the AI could actually love a human being, and the bigger question being whether or not a human being could actually love the robot. And I mean, but I mean, I actually think that there's a deeper question that they didn't really um, articulate as vocally, at least verbally in the movie, which is just I I think the most interesting question that we get from most movies that deal with AI, which is at what point do we have moral obligations to artificial intelligence? At what point, uh, does it not even matter whether or not you love this thing? You you still have an obligation to its well being.
Yeah, I was gonna
But
wait to mention this, but it kind of ties in well with what you just said. I feel like especially when you look at the first third of the movie up until the point where she takes him into the woods,
yeah,
um it feels pretty clear to me at least that at that portion of the movie is more or less saying like, you know, I mean, look at what's happening in the movie, right? I mean, they make the decision to make David, and then they find this couple who they think is going to be perfect, and by all accounts, they pretty much are the perfect couple that would want something and be able to work well with something like that. A mechanical replacement for their child, you know. And at first, before she does the triggering thing that imprints David on her, you know, before that, she's treating it like it's a thing in the house, you know.
Right.
And there's no problem with that, really.
Right.
At no point until she does that is there really ever a moment where you think like, okay, well, there's not really anything wrong. He doesn't seem to be affected by anything she does, good or bad. And then, you know, then they say that they created this thing to feel and love, you know. So it's not until she turns that on where it starts to love, and it starts to kind of become more than just a machine that's in their house, you know. Every time it's interacting with her, it's pretty positive, you know. Even if somebody makes a mistake or something, she's treating David with at least the level of respect that another human being deserves. At least, you know, that much. Maybe not more, but close to that. The father sometimes talks about it in front of its face and talks about it like it's a lesser being, but is more or less polite to it. You know, he's looking at it as something that's helping his wife, you know, so whatever. It is what it is, you know. Then their child wakes up, and from the first moment that they start interacting, the real boy and David, right away you see that the boy is more or less treating David like another one of the teddy bears.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that the boy is overtly cruel to him. He just doesn't see him as human. That's really the bottom line. He just treats him as less than human. He's curious and he's fascinated, and he kind of wants to play with it and see what he can get it to do and what's in it for him, more or less. When he has a birthday party, the other kids are not immediately cruel to David. They aren't doing anything particularly horrid to it. They're just treating it the way you would treat a vacuum cleaner. You know, they're not treating it like a human. And so every single negative thing that happens to David throughout that entire first point of the story, it's just comes down to they're not treating it like it's another living creature. And that's where every that's where every bit of conflict comes from. So like what Matt just said, I just think at least the first part of the story, at least if not the entire thing, is kind of revolving around, you know, our like you said, our responsibility to something like this, to an artificial being or artificial beings. If we ever create them, what is our responsibility to them? And this movie would seem to be saying that it's to treat them, if not like equals, certainly like something that's alive, that has value and feelings.
Yeah. And, you know, it is one of those things that, you know, it also, you know, I mean, obviously movies like Ex Machina have brought up similar, you know, questions about, uh, you know, when we hit that singularity, you know, when
Yeah.
we hit that moment, and it's it is it is such a fun question because there's no easy answer. I think the easiest answer is probably play it safe, and you know, because I mean, you know, it's just one of those things where like you know, you can talk about ethics all you want, and you know, talk about, you know, the, you know, our obligation to, you know, the well-being of conscious creatures, and then you immediately run into the problem of we don't even really know how to measure consciousness. I mean, like, there's no consciousness center of the brain. I mean, like, you know, it's the one thing that can't be an illusion, but I mean, but still, I mean, for all I know, I could be, for all any of us know, we could just be artificial intelligences ourselves interacting with a bunch of other AIs in some massive simulation, uh, and and not even know it, but we're still conscious. Uh, uh, and we definitely understand our own, moral worth, and what we expect others to feel obligated to do or not do to us. But yeah, the second that you have a being which is it just looks like Haley Joel Osment. It just looks like a normal kid, and you wouldn't be any the wiser that it's a robot unless somebody cut it open and showed you. That it is difficult to find a reason why you would uh, why you would feel vindicated in treating such a creature as a lesser being. um, uh, but at the same time, you can really understand why well, I mean, not only that, you can understand why people would be horrified of it. And I think that's something that they did bring up in AI pretty well, where they were like they were making that huge spectacle of destroying these
The flesh
robots.
fair.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean the closer that these artificial intelligences get to just being able to walk among us and look like us, and that we can't tell the difference, the more terrified people get. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's precisely how we're going to react as a species the moment that a David is actually put out into the world, or an Ava or whatever is actually put out into the world. And I mean, I think it is going to be something that people respond angrily and therefore violently toward the moment that there is this. Hey, by the way, this person that you've been interacting with for the last 2 hours, this person that you just think is completely normal, this like this new person, maybe you even have a crush on her, maybe you're thinking that something, yeah, that's a robot. I think a lot of people are going to be freaked out.
Stands to
But
reason.
yeah,
Yeah, I
and
mean, I think the character, Jude Low's character,
Joe Gigolo.
yeah,
yeah,
Gigolo Joe, he says about one of the frustrating thing to humans. I guess they feel that the robots are going to outlive them, and that's especially because robots last longer than the average human. I
Yeah,
guess
I like his little
lifespan.
monologue that you're talking about. It's a good little spot.
Yeah, so it's I don't know if he was talking about robots in general just inheriting the earth, or just the fact that robots in general just live longer than humans. But yeah, something about that like, it's as if they have more value than a human to some degree, or at least like more longevity. So it's just like an envy thing as well. There's like, not only
yeah,
they look like us, they're stronger than us, they're better in the sack, like Gigolo Joe, and they're gonna live longer than, and they don't age. Like, there's so much to envy. Once you get to that level of quality, as yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you can see the envy from people for sure. And then at the same time, once they see the kid, once they see David, then their humanity, they reconnect with their humanity, that like, oh my god, this is a boy, this is no longer some creepy looking robot, this is like, we can't kill that thing like cold blood. Like, it's just, it doesn't compute like in the human brain to do that. So it's a very good scene for sure.
Yeah.
um Although one thing I would say that's very problematic, and Diana brought this up, as we watched this together as parents. It's very
Yeah.
appropriate. But the biggest problem with the premise for this movie is that they do stay the same age. Like, it doesn't really make sense that much that someone would want a kid that always stays at the same age. That's a pet. That is really a pet. Like, that doesn't, like, that stays the same size all the time. Like, the whole point of having kids is that they start off from being very, very small. Even if you adopt them at a slightly older age, do they eventually become adults? Whereas with this, unless the technology got to the point where you can have a robot that either is replaced yearly or actually evolve with time.
The
uh,
iPhone of robots.
yeah, exactly. Like, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have an artificial kid unless it is a temporary solution. Unless it is that, because that's the one thing I thought, like, why didn't they pick a couple that, you know, is not fertile and can't have kids? And this is the alternative to fostering or adopting. To pick a couple with a kid that might wake up, that's not a good idea, because then when he wakes up, there's this issue of, like, they're not really equal siblings.
Well,
But yeah,
go ahead.
no, but just to finish that point is like, but maybe that makes sense because they really wouldn't want him long term. Because eventually if the kid wakes up, because, like, there's no point. They're not gonna have David until they're in their 70s, and he's gonna stay a kid. That's a weird thing. I
Well,
don't know.
well, I mean, if they did decide to keep him, that's like especially with the acting talent of Haley Joel Osment. I mean, you've basically got yourself a perpetual like Gary Coleman or Webster, like to keep bringing in the childhood acting money. Like just
That's a weird
Yeah,
thought.
that's a very meta thought. But well, obviously, when we've
oh yeah,
discussed
he's 35. Yeah.
all these analogies to real life, that's actually the equivalent of having a kid that's on the spectrum. Sometimes people have kids with autism that basically never grow up. Like, they're a lifelong commitment, and even in their 30s and 40s, are can't completely rely on themselves, and so the parents are essentially stuck with a kid for life. But still, they still get older. They still evolve to some degree. They're not staying put, like, physically and mentally.
Yeah.
Although mentally, actually, if anything, David probably would advance mentally eventually if he is an actual
I would think
AI.
so.
Yeah, it'd be very freaky. He would basically be like a 40, 50-year-old. He might be a 200-year-old, like, with his advanced, like, AI, like, computation and stuff. He would have the wisdom of a. Anyways, that's like one of the few problematic things,
Well,
like,
so
with the
I was
premise.
going to mention a couple of things about that. Number one, I can't say for sure, obviously, but my read on this is um, that William Hurt and his associates chose the couple that they chose because it did not seem likely that the child would ever wake up. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's what we're supposed to read into it, is that this is not going to happen. And then the crazy curveball is that it did happen, that the kid did wake up, and they had to deal with that fact. In terms of what their plan was, I think they chose that couple because they were like, this is perfect. It'll emotionally replace the child for however long, and so on and so forth. I didn't think they even considered the possibility of the kid waking up. But that could be just me. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I was gonna say also, I wanted to ask you guys about this and what your thoughts were on this, because I have thought this since the very first time I saw this movie, and seeing it now again. I did not recall the speech. I mean, I recall the scene with the speech, but I didn't recall the specifics and the stuff that William Hurt says in the opening scene, where he is addressing a room full of people and discussing how he's like, all right, we got all these robots and we're making all this money and so on and so forth. And he pitches them the idea and he says, I want to make a robot that can love. That whole scene. I remembered the scene well, in terms of like visually what it looked like and more or less what they were talking about. I did not realize I must have completely forgotten the opening narration or whatever, where it talks about how this new world that they're in. There's tons of people who don't have kids. And because of the rising seawaters and the devastated population and so on and so forth, there's like rules and safeguards and all these things put in place. And there's just tons of couples that would like kids but don't have any. And if you had a kid and it died, you probably can't have another one and all this stuff like that. There's like all these little things that they kind of briefly mention. And I did not remember any of that. That goes a long ways. And then the fact that he even mentions it in his monologue, or in his little pitch, he says, think of all the couples that would love this, that would benefit from this. And I did not remember that part of his pitch. I just remembered him as like this curious scientist who wanted to take the next step, you know? But to me, the first time I ever saw the movie, I remember that when he gets to the building with the crying lions and he meets essentially Geppetto, when he meets William Hurt for the first time, he starts walking around and from the pictures on his desk and of course all the other stuff in the movie, it becomes abundantly clear that obviously that David is physically and in virtually every way possible modeled after William Hurt's dead child. And I just wanted to ask you guys if you thought about this or not, because even way back when I first saw this thing, I remember thinking like, once you get to the end of the movie and you discover that part that was left out at the beginning, it's like, I get that William Hurt's the boss. He's the CEO of the company. But if you're one of the high ups in the whole decision-making process of this company, don't you at least, even if you don't raise your hand in that boardroom, don't you start talking to your fellow people and kind of like going, the boss is talking about this. It kind of feels like a conflict of interest, right? Like, I mean, this is almost immoral at this point, right? I mean, he is taking huge resources from this company and he is using them very selfishly. He is trying to recreate a robotic version of his son because he's in mourning. He lost a son, and that's very sad, but it's like, there's something about that I just always thought was just like, what? Nobody's talking about this? Like, nobody? So I don't know.
It seems like it's more of like an homage maybe to his son, but also he kind of shits on David when he tells them that, I think the line is something like, well, my son was one of a kind, you're a first of a kind or something.
Yeah. Well,
like, which is an insult.
Yeah. Well, I the reason I brought all that up, aside from I just wanted to hear what you guys had to say about it, but also just it kind of goes along with what you were saying earlier too. You were saying like, what would be the point, kind of, because it doesn't grow. To me, I never thought about that aspect. You're absolutely right that it would be a problem as a product. It would be a problem. I immediately, once you said that, my answer in my head it was, well, William Hurt didn't think that far through. He's a mourning father, and he wants a robotic version of his son.
Yeah, well, this was whole an experiment.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't give a crap like what's going to happen in the future. He just wants it, and who knows? It's probably a terrible idea.
I can buy that. I mean, another thing I would throw at you as far as issues with the movie along the way is this whole thing with the police chasing Gigolo Joe. And conveniently they keep taking him, but they don't care about David. They're not even questioning like what's his status. Like, and then it happens twice. It happens once like out in the city, and then one time in submerged New York. It's like they keep like sucking him and like getting him, but David is just like left untouched. The whole thing was just way too convenient.
Yeah.
But
real quick, since we're talking about the police following Gigolo Joe, I just wanted to bring this up because I mean, it just in general, I I think my favorite thing about watching this movie this time through was noticing all the cast. I've already said Haley Joel Osment is fantastic in this. He's pretty much the reason to watch the movie, more or less. But not just like the big characters. Obviously, Jude Law he provides a lot of really desperately needed levity in this movie. I even remember the first time I saw it, think he was very funny. Like the way he's. I mean, you're creating a robotic gigolo. He's got to be like witty, and he is. He's very witty. William Hurt's performance is kind of one note, but it's still good. It's kind of what the movie needed from his character, so it's fine. But my God, the cameos in this movie, the small roles, like Clark Gregg is one of William Hurt's like number two men. Enrico, I always have trouble saying his name. Colantoni, the husband who slit his wife's throat that starts the whole thing with the police chasing Joe Gigolo. He's a great actor. I love that guy. Galaxy Quest. But and then of course Brendan Gleeson's so good. And then I don't know, Gil, if you noticed, but they get in the car and hitchhike to that one city, and Johnny Chase is in there.
Yeah, no, I saw that.
Which is kind of funny because later on, when Adrian Grenier, whatever his name is, when they ended up doing the Entourage movie, they got Haley Joel Osment to show up as like a pretty big role.
Oh, really?
He's like the villain.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
And then like the voices stuff, you got Robin Williams, you got Ben Kingsley, Meryl Streep, and then a really hilariously short cameo from Chris Rock.
He has the robot that like gets blown out of the cannon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of cameos, and it's interesting. Yeah, you started listing even more than I knew, but like I noticed some of the big ones. I didn't know about Meryl Streep, but
she plays the voice of the fairy.
Oh, the fairy. Oh, I see. Yeah, I wouldn't catch that. She doesn't have a super recognizable voice.
Yeah.
It's interesting, all these touches. But I guess we let our way into towards the end, so we should definitely touch on that. It's to me, and I know this is the wrong ending, but for some reason when I first watched this movie, and I don't know if you recall my theory about this, to me it's a very depressing ending, but when he just chooses to jump into the water and just give up, I don't know why at the time. Maybe I was just a very dark
pessimist
to 20-year-old when this came out. It's a period in your life. I just felt like that would have been the perfect ending, at least for me at that age. Like I don't know why, because the Pinocchio story is about him becoming a real boy, and if I'm not mistaken, if I'm recalling it correctly, he does kind of become eventually a real boy. Sort of.
I mean, as much as you can in this kind of a movie.
Yeah. So and in this, he couldn't really become a real boy. He couldn't really like earn the love of his mother, and he finds out that his creator was an asshole. Like he's telling him like, well, you're first of a kind. You're so not special. You're just a beginning. You're like the first model. Yeah. You're the iPhone 1. So for him to make the conscious choice of, well, if I can't be a real boy, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to jump to my death. I'm going to give up on this endeavor. And in doing so, that's what makes him a human. Like in making the choice to end your life. Like when has there ever been a movie with an AI, with a robot, where there's the choice? Like there's, in 2001, they murder the AI. They kill the AI, but and in Ex Machina they release the AI into the wild.
Well, she escapes.
she escapes, but it was all premeditated. Like he intended, a spoiler alert, like he intended for her to be so sophisticated that she would get out. Like it was basically him kind of committing suicide. but he wanted the suicide to be his product. That the thing that's gonna go out there and basically demolish the world will be his creation. That's what that movie was kind of like about. And and in this one, it's an AI that's choosing, instead of like to keep evolving and progressing and being better than a human, it ends. For one thing, it knows it can live forever if it just kept its battery, powered or whatnot. But it chooses to die, and that's the most human thing, like that a robot could do in that moment, in that specific moment. But there's also like the Blade Runner, we said, the robot that chooses to mercy. So I felt like that's a thing that we haven't seen yet. That would have been a perfect ending.
I mean, I remember you vaguely talking about it, but it had been so many years since I'd seen it. So this time through, I was kind of watching for it. And not to say that I really hate the ending or anything, but I kind of agree with you. Like, I knew what was coming, but some part of me, when he falls in the water and the fish start to swim around him a little bit, some part of me kind of just wanted it to end there.
Yeah, but I don't know if something would have had to be done to earlier in the movie to earn that ending. Like I don't know if maybe without changing some stuff earlier on that it
Yeah,
would fall
maybe.
flat, and it would be very depressing even for Kubrick. Even if Kubrick did it, it would be a too depressing of an ending. Although to me, it's life affirming in some ways. To me personally,
Well,
but
I mean, a good parallel would be the ending of Bicentennial Man, right?
Yes.
Where it was actually the deliberate decision of the AI to, basically have something going on in his, mechanical body that would eventually,
Yeah.
crap
He could
out and
well,
kill him.
he could continue to live forever, but he wanted to have the human experience, and part of changing his body into a human as much as he possibly could involved him suddenly starting to age and eventually
Yeah,
die.
yeah.
and by the way, and I read that book, and it's like really good. And the book itself is it is better than one of those cases where it's better than the movie. Like
Yeah,
it's very impactful.
that movie is one of those movies where I feel like it has really what's the you were kind of mentioning it before. It's like it has great ideas. The movie has great ideas, but there's a problem with the movie. I bet you as a book I could easily see that being really good, like better.
Yeah, no, it's Isaac Asimov. I think it's one of my favorite books of his for sure. It's a short story, but still
I
fairly long.
I've I believe that. I mean, I've only read one of his novels, but I'm starting to really feel like Asimov is better in small doses.
Yeah, I agree. I've listened audiobooks and read a lot of his short stuff, and his long stuff is a bit too much. Like it's a bit too dense for me. Like in short doses, he is
And
better.
his short stories are fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. But
Well,
in any case, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I was also just going to, as like an aside, just kind of say, like, really, I think that short stories are the best literary inspiration that you can get for making a feature length film. I mean, those are, I mean, some of the best feature films that we have that are based off of literary sources are based off of short stories that are like less than 20 pages. And
Shawshank Redemption short story,
yeah,
considered
I
IMDb's number one.
I mean, basically everything that Frank Darabont has ever made that worked was based off of a Stephen King short story, uh, except for The Walking Dead. But he also stopped working on that a lot of years ago. But you know,
Yeah, but
A lot
it
of
is
years.
true that with short stories, it's easier to expand on the universe and make it fit the cinematic world. Whereas with the novel, you have to shrink everything
Yeah,
and make it fit into a visual medium, which is doesn't always.
and try to tell the same story.
Yeah, but yeah, but I do wonder. Bicentennial Man came out like in '99, so I wonder if that's one of the reasons why. I don't know how the short story ends, like for the AI thing, the super
Oh, my
toys.
my brother read it. He said it. Oh, sorry. Were you still talking about Bicentennial Man?
Oh no, yeah, I was talking
Just
about
that the
super
book is better.
toys. The short story that
Yeah.
AI is based on, whether that one ends with some sort of like his wish
Oh,
being granted, essentially.
you when you said it 3 times now, but this time I finally got it. Okay, super
Yeah.
toys. Like they say that line. That's what he calls Teddy.
Yeah, well, because the short story is called "Super Toys Last All Summer Long."
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
like, because the boy treats him like a super toy. Like, he's just like the new toy, and then and what's his name? Joe Gigolo tells him that humans fear them because they last forever or they last longer. So
yeah.
hence the title, Super Toys Last Also. That's cool.
Mm.
I just got it.
Oh yeah. And it's good to mention Teddy is definitely my favorite
Oh,
character in the
oh
movie.
my god. Oh my god. Okay, Teddy. If there's anything that makes this movie worth watching other than Haley Joel Osment's performance, Teddy. Holy hell. They say I did not know this until just recently. After watching it this time, I went through all the IMDb garbage. Apparently, Stan Winston said that Teddy was the most difficult animatronic device that his company ever made, that he ever made. He said that he had more people working on Teddy than like the Tyrannosaurus Rex from Jurassic Park.
Mhm.
Because he was like walking on his own and stuff.
He said they said I should look this up. It's so stupid of me not to, but like I don't know, something like 250 points of articulation or some crazy thing like that. And I was just like, oh my god, that's nuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the way, I just kind of looked up the plot synopsis for Super Toys Last All Summer Long. Holy crap! Is Spielberg's movie a lot more optimistic than the actual short story?
Hmm.
uh, Basically, after the real boy, you know, uh, pops up again, the mom just uh, takes David back and has him destroyed.
Mm.
Like it's really just cold. I mean, I should read the entire thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
But
just
that is interesting. So it doesn't go much
Cold
farther.
blooded.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think so to go back to the ending. So what I guess Kubrick was going for, because apparently it was his idea, and how Spielberg executed it.
Mhm.
The idea of the ending of him surviving humanity, basically like being frozen there for like a couple of thousand years, and being visited by, I guess, aliens, but Diana kind of thought that they might just be AIs, that they could be an evolution of the robots or something. That I guess that's conceivable, but they definitely look like aliens, like a classic alien thing would be. They're also
Yeah, that never
examining. Yeah.
yeah that never occurred to me, but I think it's entirely plausible.
They
Yeah.
there's a in the subtitles where the aliens speak, there's a bit of dialogue that really heavily implies that they're from another planet. They say something about like I don't know, they refer to humans as like the civilization on this planet or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, but that ultimately, I guess what would have been missing if you stop the movie when he drowns himself is yes, it's that he needs his wish to be fulfilled. That's one thing to have, because the movie is about fairy tales.
Mm.
And if you're going to make a movie about fairy tales, you need to have a fairy tale ending, even
Mm.
though that's too sweet. But maybe the twist here is that because the aliens are coming to explore humanity, and they're exploring it from the point of view of, that's what was unique about humans, is that they were storytellers.
Mm.
That they learned about life through storytelling and through moral fairy tales and things like that. And yes, they're very flawed, but but that was always something that was there, the sense of dreaming, of wanting wish to be fulfilled, and then fulfilling those wishes sometimes through stories, like the stories that we tell ourselves in order to keep sustaining life, to keep us moving forward. That's what kept David moving forward, which is why ultimately he became human, because he had that forward momentum of trying to achieve this goal, even though it was unrealistic, it was unattainable, but that ultimately the aliens were able to fulfill that for him by resurrecting the mom. But the mom, it doesn't make sense that the mom is so well behaved with David. It's almost as if they brought the mom not exactly the way that she was. They almost imprinted her with love towards them so they can have one perfect day. And they say, like, our goal is for you to be happy. So I wonder if they're completely manipulating it, and based on what they assessed in his mind, this is what he wants, so this is what we're gonna give him.
Maybe I'm reading not too much into this, but maybe I'm reading this wrong. Like I'm reading this in the wrong way or something. But I had a bit of a thought about that. So if what I said before is even remotely accurate, that one of the things they're kind of pushing towards with this movie, you know, in terms of AI and us as a society, would be, you know, like I said, our responsibility to artificial beings would be to treat them as a living creature and so on and so forth, right? So, as I said before, the whole first third of the movie, that whole first section of the movie, it seems as though all the conflict comes from the moments when somebody is not treating David like a human, not treating him with the same respect that a human being deserves, right? Um, if that's remotely accurate, to me, it seems as though he wants to be a real boy, and he is created with the ability to love. He's created with the capacity to feel love and to love the mom. The mom seemed to reciprocate the love that he had, and she started to accept him as her child. However, life got in the way, right? Her husband never quite felt the same way she did. And then, of course, the biggest problem when when her real child returned. That just created a domino effect where every single thing, she could never truly love uh, David as a real boy when her real boy comes back. You know, it's just not a possibility. Um, so, in a sense, the aliens or whatever they are at the end, if they can't make him real, in a way, he sort of becomes a real boy when she truly loves him. So they say in the thing that they created her for one last day, recreated her, I should say, reassembled her with all her memories, except now she's been created in a way for them to have one last day together where everything's the same, but miraculously, for whatever reason, her husband and her son never existed. You know, they just don't enter the picture at all. And so without that, because without that competing force or society's competing forces, suddenly she's able to love him fully in the way she already did, but had all these other competing things in her life drawing on her and pulling her away from him and so on and so forth. And in a weird sort of way, that's kind of like he's real at that point.
Yeah, so I guess that was the issue, that in order for her to have a similar biological connection as you would, is you need to have zero distractions or points of comparison like a biological kid, and then you can just purely be present with one-on-one.
If it
Yeah.
doesn't make him real, at the very least, it kind of allows him to feel complete, probably. Like it allows her to love him completely, I guess. And maybe there's something about that being loved or something that it makes him real. I don't know. I'm just kind of grasping at straws here at this point.
Yeah, no, and that's why I like these kind of movies, even though this movie maybe lays it on a bit too thick or goes too much into detail, it's whether it's that or there's that nice touch when Gigolo Joe gets sucked by the police the second time and he tells David, "I was here." Like
Mm,
he kind of throws that
yeah,
line, like I
yeah,
existed.
Mhm.
I was a person in this age because he's probably gonna get dismantled or who knows what's
yeah.
gonna happen because he was framed for the murder of this person in the hotel. But yeah, like or I don't know if he was framed. It seems like he was framed, but I don't know if it was that or that he accidentally killed the person. But whatever, he was wanted,
It's
and he's
hard to say if Enrico didn't think twice about Joe Gigolo and his motivation was entirely revenge against his wife, or if he was aware of the fact that by killing the wife in the manner in which he did and leaving, and just taking off the way he did with the timing and everything, if that would also have a secondary effect of framing Joe Gigolo. They're not very clear about his motivation or what his overall plan was, or if he even had a plan.
Yeah, but I did like the touch of the fact that like he's on a quest to become human, and Joe Gigolo is appreciating the fact that he has consciousness, that he knows that he exists, that he has value, that he wants to continue on existing, that he's yeah, it's I think it's all good touches for sure, but maybe there's something, and the fact that Teddy technically also is very human. I mean, to some degree, he's the most stoic of the bunch, and
Yeah,
you know, it's
he's so
very
fantastic.
yeah. I needed more of Sometimes people talk about like what a movie needed more or less of. I needed more of Teddy and less of other things.
Me too.
Like I think the fact that if Teddy became a more central character, where you realize that like, oh my God, this thing looks like a toy bear, but it's actually the most human thing of everything, like or something like that.
Yeah.
That he gets it more than anybody else, even though
Well,
he looks
he's
like a toy.
it is conceivable to say. I mean, so okay, the when Brendan Gleeson and the other guys operating that moon hot air balloon thing that they use to capture the robots, when
Mhm.
he's hunting them down, they point at their little machines at Joe Gigolo, and they're all surprised because they're like, "Oh, that's a human," and then they're like, "Nah, nah, he's freezing too cold. He's there," and they all go, "Wow, what's a late model such and such doing with all this junk, all this garbage?" So based on their dialogue, we can imply that he is a state of the art gigolo, robot. He probably hasn't been around for more than 5 years or something like that. He's a very advanced, you know, sex robot, you know, um, and yet in his small time on Earth, he, while he may be a less advanced robot, less sophisticated robot than David, he knows more than David. He's more experienced in life and the world and how things work. He's constantly showing David how to get around and how to do things. It's pretty clear that Teddy is the oldest and most experienced out of them. Maybe not the most experienced in life because he probably spent the grand, chunk of his life, the lion's share of his time on Earth in the house or something, just playing with the children and interacting with humans. But there's always moments like when he's dangling from the hot air balloon or something, and he just like he can read people. He's sophisticated enough to read their expressions. The boy sees his fingers slipping and he looks up at the boy, sees the concern on his face, and he just says to him, "I'll break," meaning like if I fall, I'm gonna break, and all those little things. Like his lines are so economical, and he doesn't say 10 words when three will do, and whatever. But so often he chimes in with things that show that he's very knowledgeable, like in at least in the basic sense of like he's been around for a while.
Yeah, almost like a Yoda-esque type of
Yeah.
thing.
I
Yeah.
was I made I was thinking in my head real quick. I didn't go super deep into it or anything, but you know, um, movies that have an artificial character in them, like an animatronic character or some, not including animated stuff. We're not counting that, but a movie where we're supposed to actually accept something that's on the screen as a living or as a creature, that is not, real, like a robot or something. And I was like, man, Teddy's got to be in like the top 5. He's got to be like one of the greatest characters that's not even a human at all. Like, that's not a human. That it's a big deal, like, I mean, obviously you've got like Star Wars is a good example because there's tons of droids that have voices and characters and things like that. But and then there's the short circuit movies have Johnny Five, and he's very human and whatever. And one of my favorites, of course, is Interstellar. I love Tars so much. He's like an amazing robot character. But really, I think Teddy takes the cake. I mean, he's right up there with Tars as like one of the greatest robot characters of all time.
Yeah, Tars was the fact that Nolan was able to, after all these different characters over the years that like were successful, he was able to give it like a whole other angle, the
Really
squarish
different angle.
looking,
Yeah.
like
and the such a non-human body, but such a human personality.
yeah, something about the stoicism of these characters that just very infectious for sure. When there's a lot of like neurosis around them,
Yeah.
and they're like just steadfast, like just I'm gonna break, or like just like I don't think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
It's just very like mindful characters. But
And then Tars is just so funny.
yeah, no, I should really revisit Interstellar for sure because I remember really liking that movie even with all the issues. But I think I've only watched it the one time. I should.
I've
Definitely.
only seen it once in theaters.
Yeah, no, me. I should.
I saw it twice in IMAX, but I actually think that Teddy and Tars and a few of those other characters are really interesting illustrations that I think that there's a dearth of real of really great movies that deal with AI in that sense, um, because it is one of those illustrative moments, like I'll break, that kind of proves Picasso's point about art being the lie that forces you to see the truth. And um you're watching Teddy in that scene, and obviously if you're a human being with a pulse, even if you're a callous uncaring asshole like I am, you're still feeling for that damn bear. and you realize that it's all fiction, and you realize that uh even in the fiction it's a robot, and it's not a real bear, and it's not even trying to be anthropomorphic in any way. It's not even nobody even attempted to make it look human, but you still care for the damn thing. And it's the same thing with Tars. It doesn't look anything like a human. It doesn't even have a face for your brain to what is that term, pareidolia, where you see faces where they don't exist. It doesn't even have that, but you're still invested in that character and its well-being, even though it's it's just a big block. And I mean, I actually would love to see a movie that's more like, um, well, I mean, I guess 2001: A Space Odyssey is probably the best example of an AI that you actually start to care for. That is just, it doesn't look like a human being at all. But obviously, Star Trek managed to deal with this a lot during TNG with Data, where he's designed to look somewhat human, but look not human enough that that he's not human. And
I think there's a big difference though when there's an actor in a suit, versus something that you're like you said, that your brain immediately knows is not real.
Yeah.
When I say real, I don't mean real. I mean a person, a human.
Not a Homo sapien.
Yeah, or like one of the thing Ebert said this when he was reviewing Short Circuit 2 with Siskel, I think, or something like that way back then.
Mhm.
Um he was just kind of talking about how, and this doesn't necessarily involve robots, it can be just about anything,
Yeah.
but they were discussing the movie and good things and bad things and whatever, and he wanted to be as concise as possible, I believe, because he basically
Mhm.
just said, look, in these kind of movies where the movie is asking you to accept that a hunk of paper mache or a bunch of metal or whatever on the screen is a living thing with emotions, you know,
Yeah.
to some extent. He goes, to me, the test is always how I feel when they're killing it. You know, he goes, I
Yeah.
mean, look at ET. He goes, that thing is just a bunch of paper mache. That is a stupid looking little puppet. Doesn't even look human at all. But my God, when that thing is dying, my heart is just like feeling for it, you know? And he's like, this movie's no ET, but at the end when they're attacking the robot mercilessly, I'm like, hey, like stop. And so it's like, yeah, it passed the test for me. It's a good movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. I don't know. It is just that weird thing where you know the. I guess Her actually did a pretty good job
Yeah, there's no body in that
in
one.
AI too. Yeah. Um, but it is just such an interesting thing to have to deal with. Like if you really want to deal with the ethics of artificial intelligence, I mean, I think that one of the most. I think the natural conclusion is someday there has to be a really great movie that's handled by somebody who's probably way more talented than I am. Uh, who where it's just like it's a computer, and if you pull the plug, I it's just a computer, and it's an AI that's living in a computer. It just looks like my laptop that's right in front of me right now. That's all it looks like, but it is so human and so responsive and like easily passes the Turing test, flying colors. There's no question about it. You feel like it's a human being. You feel like there's no reason for you to believe that there isn't a consciousness in it, other than it doesn't look like something that we would associate with having a consciousness. And if you unplug that thing, it's gonna die. And it's that simple that you can just unplug it and it's going to die. Do you feel, I mean, if you pull that plug, like, should you be on trial for murder the next day? Like, should you be, like, how should we actually deal with that kind of a situation? Because it feels like it's a lot easier to uh to talk about ethics when it comes to AI in fiction, when the AI looks like one of us, or at least looks like a cuddly bear, or looks like but just dealing with something that's particularly cold right in front of you, but do we still have this yeah, I mean, just exploring that landscape is just fascinating, and I don't think that we're ever going to have enough movies about it until we actually hit that singularity in real life.
Yeah,
uh,
the
uh,
uh it, it's kind of halfway in between because but Blade Runner 2049, you've got the Joy
yeah,
character, yes, we have a performance from an actress who's right there on the screen because she looks perfectly real and everything like that, but it's just a hologram. Her real physical tangible body is a little thing the size of like a pen or like a
yeah,
phone or something. It's a tiny little thing. And then when, again, spoiler alert, but when, that moment where she's got no backups or anything like that, and they might get crushed, it's like, you're like, oh God, no, kind of moment. But what you just said, Matt, had me thinking that might be the downfall. Not the downfall, that's the wrong way of putting it, but that might be a problem or a shortcoming, I guess is the right word, with the movie Her, because I love that movie. But there is no point in that movie where any of the conflict comes from her being potentially destroyed. I mean, there's the abandonment, and there's the is society going to accept this, and to what extent can he fall in love with her? Can she fall in love with him? There's all that. It's a great movie. I really love that movie a lot, but it's weird that's not in there. There's no point where there's even a moment where there's a potential danger that she might, after they've bonded, that she might be destroyed.
Yeah.
Well, I think generally everything you've discussed about the AI is, for me personally, it's caring. I think whenever these characters show that they care for other characters, like Teddy caring for David, like Tars caring for the crew members, then you immediately sympathize with them. Like, you immediately it makes them seem, just for one thing, likable, because they care. They try to do the right thing. It's a very human. It's a very good human characteristic. So I think whenever an AI shows that, there's an immediate attachment to that character by an audience. That's the easiest way for me, I think, to create sympathy. But yeah, as for like if it needs to be a computer, it could be a computer. I think, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't that movie that we brought up a few weeks ago? I know there was something weird in The Abyss too, that communicated there, but I think it was like specifically with what's his name, with Ed Harris. But there was another movie where they communicate with an entity or something. Wasn't it like Sphere or something? It's like a movie where they type words.
Both of those movies have stuff where they're typing. Sphere has scenes where they're typing and it's responding to them, but they don't know what's going on yet. And it's not an artificial intelligence. It's like I think it's Sam Jackson or something manifesting something into reality, unconsciously or subconsciously or something like that. But that's an interesting scene where they're doing that. The Abyss, there is a bunch of scenes with them typing stuff, but I think it's all from Ed Harris as a dive suit where he can't speak because he's got the liquid oxygen or whatever, and the crew or something with the typing. I think when he starts speaking to the alien entity or whatever, I think it's like either through the water shapes or at the very end when he's just literally talking to them.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we went too long. I don't know how I'm going to cut this down. But at some point, a little bit earlier, I was going to say that we should have wrapped on a cinematography rant, because
yes,
I don't know why, but I felt like Kaminsky, I feel like he went a bit overboard with this movie. I feel like there's a few scenes where he does not need crazy shafts of light coming through the window in the house. Like, it's a bit too much. Like, there's plenty of opportunities in the movies for shafts of light to be hitting the frame. But there are some moments where, like, no, I don't think I needed that right there. And I don't think that's necessary. I don't know what you thought, Matt, about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny because I think this was like the Kaminsky era where he really was like balls to the wall every single movie, like, just saying like film can handle everything, so let me just make film handle everything, which I kind of enjoy. uh, but
Shocking.
yeah. Oh yeah, film looks awesome when you burn it out. So let's burn it out on every shot. Film looks awesome when it's when you have really deep blacks. So let's go with really deep blacks all the time. Like I don't know. It. I think this is kind of a middle of the road movie in terms of quality of cinematography for Janusz Kaminski. Um, uh, I mean, it's definitely not one of those things like, actually, one criticism that I still have of Warhorse is the way that he handled the day exterior scenes, in that where like he's still doing 3-point lighting even though there's only one light source,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
you're
it's like West Side Story had a similar issue. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think that he tries to make everything look too polished in Hollywood every so often, uh, uh, especially in day exterior scenes. But yeah, it's it is funny because Yana. I mean, this was like his next movie after Saving Private Ryan, and Saving Private Ryan was even though like geez, what's the right word to describe the cinematography in Saving Private Ryan other than, well, I mean, obviously
Cool.
perfect for the movie is probably the best way to describe it, but innovative, but it was also fairly stripped down for Kaminsky and what we're used to. He really did kind of let the sun do what the sun was going to do, and there were a lot of scenes in the movie that were really just like one light on an actor's face, and like maybe a couple of uh, pieces in the background to kind of shape things and give depth. But uh, yeah, I think maybe after he stripped things down a little bit on Saving Private Ryan, he went into AI and was just like, okay, I didn't use any 18K HMIs for Phil in Saving Private Ryan, so I'm just going to get all the 18K HMIs and uh, pound them through these windows. And I didn't use any diffusion on Saving Private Ryan, so I'm going to use all the diffusion on AI. But like he kept a lot of that going with Minority Report. I just think Minority Report worked a little bit better because
Yeah,
it was more
definitely better.
monochrome.
Yeah, no, I think he did do an overcorrection for AI, and then maybe he hit just the right tone with Minority Report. But
Yeah.
yeah. Oh well.